Welcome back to another episode of The Next Level Shift with your host, me, Todd Clark. And today we're going to talk about the mindset shift from firefighter to officer. As you know, these episodes are brought to you by Next Level Responder. It's a consulting business for first responders to enhance their performance, leadership, and overall well-being as a first responder in all aspects. Today we're basically, talking about the day you promote in the fire service. Your job changes, even if your uniform doesn't. Tools are the same, the station is the same, the calls are the same, but the responsibility changes immediately. And what surprises a lot of people is that the biggest shift isn't operational, it's mental. Because the moment you step into a leadership role, you stop being responsible for just yourself, and you become responsible for the people around you. That shift catches a lot of good firefighters off guard. The first reality of promotion. When you're a firefighter, your focus is fairly straightforward. You show up, you train hard, perform the job well, you take care of your equipment, you take care of your crew. Your performance is mostly judged by what you do. But when you become an officer, the standard changes. You're no longer evaluated only by your own performance. You're evaluated by the performance, attitude, and professionalism of the people you lead. That's the big adjustment, because now your words carry weight, and sometimes even your silence carries weight. The common mistake most new officers make. Not saying, that I'm the best officer around and things like that, but this is just my take. One of the most common mistakes new officers make is trying to say or stay exactly the same person that they were before promotion. They want to stay one part of the crew. They don't want to disrupt the relationships they've built. They don't want people to feel like they've changed. And while the instinct is understandable, it can actually create problems. Leadership requires boundaries. And I personally understand that, Not distance from your crew, but, clarity about your role. You can still care about the people you work with. You can still support them, but you also have to be willing to make decisions that protect standards, accountability, and a long-term culture of the organization. That's the part many people underestimate. Especially when it comes to, you taking care of your crew and making sure that they have good leadership for themselves and where they want to be, in the future, which is something that a lot of people kind of put to the wayside or find out after they have to do some kind of performance evaluations with the person. You have to be vested in your people just as much as others were, before you reach that leadership role. Leadership requires a different skill set, being a great firefighter is incredibly important. Technical skill matters, experience, worth ethic, things like that. But leadership requires a different skill set on top of that. Leadership requires communication. It requires emotional intelligence, which I talked about in previous episodes. It requires the ability to read situations, people, and sometimes have difficult conversations when they're necessary. And I talked about difficult conversations in my last leadership little talk or podcast, It requires thinking ahead, not just about the next task, but about the long-term impact of your decision. And that's where the mindset shift really happens. You move from focusing primarily on doing the job to focusing on leading the environment where the job happens. There's also an emotional adjustment. It comes with promotion, that people don't always talk about. When you move into leadership, the dynamic with your peers change. You may still care about the same people. You may have grown, in the job together, but the role is different now, your responsibilities that didn't exist before. Sometimes you have to hold people accountable. Sometimes you have to make decisions that are not everyone's, cup of tea, or not everyone necessarily agrees with you. And I can feel uncomfortable at first, but leadership isn't about being liked all the time. It's about being fair, consistent, and responsible. And, I get often, like, hey, you know what? I ride up, or sometimes I step into that lieutenant's position, or, step into that captain's position. And it's easy then, but it comes with, it hits different when you're actually in that position full time. And there's no going back. There's no, some people relate it to grandparents and having kids and stuff like that, or having grandkids, hey, what, they get to come to my house during the daytime, but in the end, I get to return them back to their parents. So it's just kind of the same thought or mentality, at least for me. A big perspective, the best leaders in the fire service eventually develop a broader perspective. They start looking beyond individual tasks and individual calls. They think about the culture. They think about the development of the people around them, and they think about how their tone, their expectations, and their decisions shape the environment their crew operates in every day. Leadership becomes less about individual performance and more about building a team that can perform consistently under pressure. And that's something that, a lot of people that promote need to think about coming out the gate. Promotion at a fire service isn't necessarily like a reward. It's a responsibility. And if you don't make the mindset shift from firefighter officer, the title alone won't carry you. Good news is that leadership can be learned. And obviously that's why I'm trying to throw my little 2 cents in through this podcast. It can be developed, but it requires intentional growth, self-awareness, and willingness to adapt. The mindset shift is where it begins. Talk to you soon. Oh yeah, and look out for a new series that I'm doing, podcasts of real leaders out here in the field, firefighters, officers, EMTs, paramedics, and they're going to give their little 2 cents about, the leadership in their world specifically. I have a podcast coming out in the next week with a 15-year veteran from City of Atlanta Fire. Look out for it. Stay blessed.